What if your need to always be a good person is slowly stealing your ability to live an honest life? Schopenhauer once suggested that much of what people call virtue is not pure moral instinct but a hidden strategy to protect themselves. When you really think about it, how often is your goodness driven by genuine care? And how often is it about avoiding judgment, rejection, or discomfort? The pursuit of constant goodness sounds admirable, but it can quietly become a cage. You learn to speak in ways that keep everyone comfortable. You agree to things you do not want to do because saying no feels selfish. You avoid hard truths because they might make you look unkind. The world rewards this behavior with approval, but that approval is conditional. The moment you stop meeting people's expectations, it can vanish. This constant performance comes at a cost. You may start to forget what you truly want because your choices are shaped by how they will be perceived rather than how they align with your own values. You might avoid necessary action because it risks making you look harsh, even when that action is the most moral choice. True morality is not about being pleasing. It is about being principled even when it costs you, and until you are willing to risk disapproval for the sake of what matters, your goodness will remain a performance. The hidden cost is that you may live for others while never truly living for yourself. Now let's get started. Number 1. The obsession with being morally perfect quietly imprisons you in the eyes of others while making you invisible to yourself. Imagine living in a room made entirely of mirrors. Everywhere you turn, you see not yourself, but reflections of how others see you. At first, it might feel reassuring. You know how to stand, how to smile, how to say the right thing so that every reflection looks flawless. But over time you begin to notice something unsettling. The mirrors never show who you really are. They only show the version of you that you have been performing. That is what the obsession with moral perfection does. It traps you in the image that other people hold of you, while slowly erasing your own sense of self. When you are fixated on being morally perfect, you live with an invisible audience in your head. Every choice is run through a mental filter of, will this make me look like a good person? You start bending your words to avoid offending anyone, even when the truth needs to be said. You take on burdens you do not want because saying no feels like failing a test you never agreed to take. And the more you keep this up, the less you recognize your own thoughts and desires. This is why so many good people feel exhausted without knowing why. It is not the acts of kindness that drain them. It is the fact that their kindness has become a performance rather than an honest choice. Imagine a friend who always agrees to help you move house, not because they truly want to, but because they fear you might think less of them if they refuse. Eventually, their help stops feeling like generosity and starts feeling like quiet resentment. Schopenhauer understood that humans are driven by self-interest, even when they pretend otherwise. Striving for moral perfection can become its own form of selfishness because it is often more about protecting your image than actually doing what is right. You avoid messy truths. You sidestep necessary conflicts. You do not live fully. The irony is that real moral strength comes from being willing to be disliked for the sake of what matters. But when you are enslaved to perfection in the eyes of others, you never give yourself that freedom. You become a prisoner of your own performance, admired from the outside, yet lost on the inside. And perhaps that is the most dangerous prison of all. Number 2. When you constantly seek to be good, you begin to neglect the fact that your motives are often more about avoiding judgment than about genuine virtue. Think about the last time you said yes to something you truly did not want to do. Maybe you agreed to stay late at work, even though you were exhausted. Maybe you helped a friend with a problem, even though you had nothing left to give. On the surface, these choices looked generous and admirable. But if you were honest with yourself, was your decision really about helping? Or was it about avoiding the discomfort of being seen as selfish? When you live in constant pursuit of being good, your actions can quietly shift from genuine virtue to self-protection. You start worrying less about whether something is right and more about how it will be perceived. You volunteer because you do not want people to think you are lazy. You apologize not because you believe you were wrong, but because you want to keep the peace. In the eyes of others, you seem kind, patient, and selfless. In reality, You might just be afraid of being judged. This is dangerous because over time, you lose touch with your true intentions. You stop asking yourself what you believe in and start asking what will keep others happy with you. It is like running a never-ending public relations campaign for your own character. The pressure is exhausting. Take, for example, someone who never says no to family requests. They show up for every errand, every favor, every crisis. People call them dependable. But deep down, they are not doing it out of pure love. They are doing it because the idea of being seen as uncaring terrifies them. In the end, this creates quiet resentment, and that resentment leaks out in passive ways, short tempers, sarcastic comments, or emotional distance. Schopenhauer would point out that this is not true virtue. Virtue requires honesty about your motives and the courage to act, even when it might make you unpopular. Constantly chasing the label of good makes you a hostage to the opinions of others. And once your worth is tied to their approval, you will keep bending yourself until you are unrecognizable. Real integrity means doing what is right without needing to be seen as right. But if your main goal is to dodge judgment, you will end up pleasing everyone except the one person who matters most, you. Number 3, the relentless performance of goodness can harden into vanity, disguised as morality. There's a strange thing that happens when someone spends too much time trying to be seen as a good person. At first it begins innocently. You want to do the right thing. You want to be fair, kind, generous. People notice and praise you. Their approval feels good, so you keep going. But somewhere along the way, the desire to do good shifts into the desire to be known as good. You are no longer chasing virtue for its own sake. You are chasing the image of virtue. The trouble is that this performance of goodness is very easy to hide behind. You can convince yourself that you are a moral person simply because you behave in ways that are socially rewarded. But when the applause becomes more important than the truth, morality slowly turns into vanity. You begin to curate your actions like a display, always thinking about how they will be perceived. You give to charity, but make sure everyone knows about it. You take a stand on issues, not because you care deeply, but because it makes you look principled. It is like the difference between someone who quietly helps a neighbor in need and someone who makes sure every act of kindness is broadcast to the world. The first is driven by compassion. The second is driven by the need to be admired. Both may look similar on the outside, but inside they are miles apart. The danger is that vanity disguised as morality is difficult to detect in yourself. You can spend years believing you are virtuous, when in reality you are just protecting a carefully polished image. Over time, this creates a hollowness you cannot quite name. You feel disconnected from your own values because you are performing them instead of living them. Schopenhauer might say that this is the ego hiding under the mask of goodness. The real test of moral character is whether you would still do the same thing if nobody was watching, if there were no likes, no praise, no recognition. Vanity needs an audience. Morality does not. The relentless performance of goodness is seductive because it earns you status, but it can leave you spiritually bankrupt. True virtue is quiet, often inconvenient, and sometimes even misunderstood. If you can only be good when others are looking, then you are not pursuing morality, you are pursuing applause. Number 4. People who always try to be good often carry a quiet resentment toward those who live more freely and unapologetically. There is an unspoken bitterness that lives inside many people who are obsessed with always doing the right thing. They will not admit it openly, but it is there. On the outside, they appear kind, patient, and endlessly accommodating. On the inside, they sometimes look at those who live freely, speak bluntly, and refuse to explain themselves. And they feel a mix of envy and irritation. This quiet resentment comes from a simple truth. When you have built your life around rules, self-control, and the constant pressure to be good, you start to notice how much you have sacrificed. You bite your tongue when someone disrespects you. You give up your free time to help others, even when you are exhausted. You constantly think about how your actions will be judged. Meanwhile, you see someone else living without those restraints. They say no without guilt. They laugh loudly without worrying about seeming inappropriate. They make choices for themselves without apologizing. At first, you might tell yourself they are selfish or irresponsible. But deep down, what bothers you is that they are free in ways you are not. Every time they do something you would never allow yourself to do, it reminds you of how confined your own life has become. Imagine a woman who has spent years being the good daughter in her family. She attends every event, runs errands for everyone, never complains. Then she sees her cousin skipping a family gathering to go on a weekend trip without explaining. She feels a surge of judgment, but beneath it is a pang of envy. That cousin is living a truth she has never dared to touch. Schopenhauer might say this resentment is the price you pay for making goodness a cage instead of a choice. When your morality is rigid and performative, it stops being a source of pride and starts feeling like a burden. You cannot fully enjoy your life because you are too busy maintaining your image. The irony is that many of the people you quietly resent are not immoral. They simply give themselves permission to live honestly. And until you face the fact that your own rules are self-imposed, you will keep feeling that same subtle bitterness whenever you see someone else living the way you secretly wish you could. Number 5. In attempting to be good for everyone, you may unconsciously train others to see you as a utility rather than a human being. There is a dangerous thing that happens when you make it your mission to be good for everyone. People stop seeing you as a person with needs, limits, and emotions. They start seeing you as a function, a tool, something that exists to solve their problems and make their lives easier. And the most unsettling part is that you may be the one who trained them to see you that way. It starts small. You help a colleague with a task they should have handled themselves. You cover for a friend who keeps making the same mistake. You cancel your own plans to accommodate someone else's schedule. Each time, you tell yourself you are just being kind, but people notice patterns. The more you show up without question, the more they start to expect it. Soon it is not "thank you for helping," but "you will help," right? Imagine a phone that is always charged, always available, always ready to respond. No one thinks about how it got charged, how much power it has left, or whether it might break from overuse. They only think about what it can do for them. That is how people begin to see you when you never set limits. Over time, this erodes your identity in their eyes. They stop asking how you feel. They stop wondering what you want. You become the dependable one, the fixer, the go-to person. But dependable can slowly turn into disposable once they assume you will never say no. Schopenhauer would argue that this is not virtue but self-neglect disguised as morality. If your goodness comes at the cost of being treated as a human being, then it is no longer goodness at all. It is quiet self-erasure. The real danger is that once you have trained people to treat you as a utility, reclaiming your humanity will feel like rebellion. They will be shocked, maybe even angry, when you start saying no. But that discomfort is the price of freedom. Being good does not mean being endlessly available. True kindness requires boundaries. Without them, you are not a friend, a partner, or a colleague. You are just a service. And no human being deserves to live as a service. Number 6. The need to be good is often rooted in fear of rejection rather than love for humanity. If you look closely at why some people are obsessed with being seen as good, you will often find that it is not driven by a deep love for humanity. It is driven by fear. Fear of being disliked, fear of being judged, fear of being excluded from the group. At its core, the need to be good can be less about compassion and more about self-preservation. When you fear rejection, you start shaping your behavior to avoid it. You agree with opinions you do not fully believe in because you do not want to be seen as difficult. You help people who would never do the same for you because you cannot bear the thought of being called selfish. You apologize for things that are not your fault just to keep the peace. On the outside, it all looks like kindness, but on the inside, it is survival. This is why some people feel quietly resentful, even while doing good deeds. Their actions are not always rooted in genuine care. They are rooted in the terror of losing acceptance. Imagine a man who always picks up the dinner bill when out with friends. Everyone praises his generosity, but if you asked him why he does it, you would find that it is not because he truly enjoys giving. It is because he believes people will like him less if he does not. Schopenhauer would likely say that this kind of morality is fragile because it depends entirely on how others react. The moment your efforts go unappreciated or criticized, your so-called goodness feels pointless. True moral strength is different. It comes from acting out of conviction, not from fear of what will happen if you do not. The irony is that living to avoid rejection often leads to the very thing you fear. People can sense when your kindness is transactional. They may accept your help, but they rarely feel real connection with you. Fear builds walls disguised as bridges. Real goodness does not ask, will they still like me? It asks, is this the right thing to do? Until your actions come from that place, you are not living with love for humanity. You're just managing your public image. Number 7. Being constantly good can prevent you from making decisions that are necessary but unpleasant, which means you indirectly cause more harm than you prevent. When you make it your mission to always be good, you start avoiding anything that might make you look harsh, selfish, or unkind. On the surface, this seems noble, but in reality, it can stop you from making decisions that are necessary yet uncomfortable. And when those decisions are avoided, the harm you were trying to prevent quietly grows in the background until it becomes much worse. Life is full of moments where doing the right thing does not feel good at all. Firing someone who is not doing their job, ending a friendship that has become toxic, confronting a family member who keeps crossing boundaries. These actions do not make you look warm or gentle, but they protect your well-being and often the well-being of others. If you refuse to act because you want to maintain the image of constant goodness, you allow problems to spread unchecked. Imagine a manager who cannot bring themselves to discipline an employee who is consistently underperforming because they do not want to seem heartless. At first it feels compassionate, but over time the rest of the team becomes frustrated, morale drops, and productivity suffers. What seemed like kindness to one person ends up being unfair to everyone else. Schopenhauer might argue that this is a failure to look beyond appearances. Real morality is not about keeping your hands clean. It is about taking responsibility for outcomes, even when the process is unpleasant. By avoiding necessary action, you trade short-term comfort for long-term damage. This pattern can also play out in personal relationships. A partner who never addresses serious issues because they want to be nice slowly builds resentment. The relationship rots quietly until it ends in a far more painful way than if the hard conversation had been had earlier. The truth is that constant goodness can be a form of cowardice disguised as virtue. It feels safer to be liked in the moment than to risk disapproval by doing what needs to be done. But avoidance is not kindness. Sometimes the most moral choice is the one that makes you look, at least for a moment, like the bad guy. And if you cannot accept that, you may end up causing far more harm than you ever prevent. Number 8. The approval you gain from being good is often conditional and evaporates the moment you stop serving someone's narrative. The approval you get from being good can feel warm, validating, even addictive. People praise your kindness, your patience, your generosity. They tell you that you are one of the good ones, and it can feel like proof that you are living life the right way. But what most people do not realize is how fragile that approval really is. It is often not a reflection of your true character. It is a reflection of how well you are serving someone else's expectations. The moment you stop fitting their version of good, the applause fades. You might notice this when you finally say no to a request, or when you speak a truth that makes someone uncomfortable, or when you choose to put your own needs first for once. Suddenly, the same people who once admired you may start questioning you, criticizing you, or even distancing themselves entirely. This is because for many, their respect for you is transactional. As long as you align with their narrative, helping when they want help, agreeing when they want agreement, they see you as virtuous. But the second you disrupt that narrative, they no longer see you as good. You have stopped being a mirror that flatters them, and for some, that is unforgivable. Imagine a friend who constantly calls you for emotional support during their crises. You listen for hours, reassure them, and show up every time. But one day you tell them you cannot talk because you have your own problems to deal with. Instead of understanding, they accuse you of being selfish. Your goodness, it turns out, only existed to them as long as it was convenient. Schopenhauer would likely point out that this is not genuine moral recognition, but a subtle form of exploitation. True respect is rooted in understanding your humanity, which includes your limits and imperfections. Conditional approval is rooted in what people can take from you. If you build your sense of worth on this kind of approval, you will live in constant fear of losing it. You will keep bending to fit other people's stories, even when it erases your own. The hard truth is that real virtue is not measured by how long you can please people. It is measured by whether you can stand firm when their approval disappears. And it will. Number 9. If you are always trying to be good, you rob others of the truth that sometimes life is served best by discomfort and confrontation. When you are always trying to be good, you often confuse kindness with comfort. You assume that protecting people from unpleasant feelings is the same as helping them. But in doing so, you rob them of the truth that life is not shaped only by reassurance. It is often shaped most powerfully by discomfort and confrontation. Some of the most important turning points in life come when someone dares to tell us something we do not want to hear. A teacher pointing out that our work is lazy, a friend telling us we are sabotaging ourselves, a partner calling out a pattern we keep denying. These moments sting, sometimes deeply, but they plant seeds for growth that endless comfort never will. When you are committed to always being good, you avoid these moments. You stay silent when you should speak. You sugarcoat truths until they lose their meaning. You offer sympathy when what is really needed is a firm challenge. On the surface, it feels compassionate. Underneath, it is often avoidance, protecting yourself from the discomfort of someone else's discomfort. Imagine a manager who sees an employee making the same mistake repeatedly but refuses to confront them because they want to be seen as supportive. The mistake continues, the employee never improves, and the eventual consequences are far worse than an honest conversation would have been. Schopenhauer might say that this is a form of moral laziness. Real moral action does not prioritize how pleasant you look in the moment. It prioritizes what will actually lead to a better outcome, even if it involves temporary pain. In friendships, families, and workplaces, a well-timed confrontation can be the highest form of respect. It means you value the person enough to risk their anger for the sake of their growth. Endless comfort, on the other hand, keeps people in the same patterns that are quietly harming them. The irony is that people who are always good often believe they are protecting relationships. But relationships built on the avoidance of truth are fragile. They collapse the moment reality pushes its way in. Discomfort, when given with care and intention, is not cruelty. It is one of the purest forms of love. And if you refuse to offer it, you may leave people stuck in the very situations you claim to protect them from. Number 10. In suppressing your darker impulses entirely, you create a pressure that eventually forces them to erupt in unhealthy ways. When you spend your life suppressing every dark thought, every flash of anger, every selfish impulse, you may think you are becoming a better person. You tell yourself that you are rising above negativity, that you are keeping your character pure. But what you are really doing is storing emotional explosives in a locked room, hoping they will never go off. They will. Human beings are not meant to operate on one emotional setting. We are a mix of generosity and selfishness, patience and frustration, kindness and cruelty. When you refuse to acknowledge the less flattering parts of yourself, they do not disappear. They wait. They sit quietly, gathering force until something small pushes you past your limit. Then, what could have been addressed in a healthy way comes out in an outburst you can barely recognize as your own. It is like sealing a pot and leaving it on the stove. At first, you think you are keeping the kitchen clean and safe. But the pressure builds with every moment, and eventually it explodes, making far more of a mess than if you had just lifted the lid now and then. This is why some of the most outwardly good people can have sudden, shocking moments of cruelty or recklessness. Years of denying their own darker feelings leaves them without the tools to handle those feelings when they inevitably surface. Imagine a parent who never expresses frustration with their children because they want to be endlessly patient. They bottle it all up until one day they snap over something trivial, shouting in a way that terrifies everyone. It is not the single incident that caused the eruption. It is the years of silent buildup. Schopenhauer might say that acknowledging your darker impulses is not moral failure. It is self-knowledge. It allows you to direct those impulses consciously instead of letting them explode unconsciously. You do not have to indulge every dark thought, but you do have to face it. Suppressing the shadow side of yourself is like denying half of your humanity. That denial does not make you virtuous. It makes you dangerous, both to yourself and to others, because what is repressed will always find a way out. And when it does, it rarely comes out clean. Number 11. The constant need to be morally pleasing can trap you in shallow relationships built on performance rather than authenticity. When your identity revolves around being morally pleasing, you begin to notice that many of your connections with people feel strangely hollow. They look fine on the surface. There are smiles, politeness, and a steady exchange of compliments, but there is an emptiness underneath. That emptiness exists because these relationships are built on a performance, not on who you really are. To keep everyone's approval, you become careful with your words. You avoid controversial opinions. You agree with things you do not fully believe in. You always play the considerate, accommodating role. People like this version of you because it never challenges them, never makes them uncomfortable, and never disrupts their view of you as a good person. But they do not actually know you. They only know the character you are playing. This creates a strange kind of loneliness. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen because the parts of you that are real are hidden away. And if you start to show them, some of those people will quietly drift from you. Not because you have changed, but because you have stopped performing the role they depended on you to play. Imagine someone who always says yes to every invitation, always listens but never shares their own struggles, always agrees just to keep the peace. They might have a wide circle of acquaintances, but when something truly difficult happens in their life, they realize that very few of those people are actually close enough to stand by them. Schopenhauer would likely see this as the ultimate irony. The pursuit of moral approval gives you more connections, but fewer real relationships. The approval is easy to win because you are giving people what they want, but it is also easy to lose because it was never based on truth. Authenticity is riskier. It means some people will not like you. It means being willing to disappoint others when your values do not align with theirs. But those who stay will stay for the real you, not the polished mask you present. If you live for moral pleasing, you may collect many polite smiles but no genuine bonds. And in the end, shallow relationships are just another kind of isolation. One where you are never truly alone, yet never truly known. Number 12. You may never know what you truly want if your primary compass is what will make others think you are good. When your main guide in life is how to look like a good person, you slowly lose the ability to hear your own inner voice. Every choice is filtered through the question, how will this be seen, rather than, is this what I really want? Over time, you stop asking yourself what would make you feel fulfilled, and instead focus on what will make others nod in approval. This is how people end up building lives that look perfect from the outside, but feel hollow on the inside. They choose careers that make them seem noble, rather than ones that excite them. They stay in relationships that appear wholesome, rather than ones that are alive with genuine connection. They volunteer for causes they are not passionate about, just to be seen as socially responsible. And after years of these choices, they find themselves wondering why their own lives feel like someone else's story. Imagine a person who dreams of traveling the world, living simply and working only enough to cover their needs, but they fear this will make them seem selfish or unambitious. So instead, they take a demanding job, buy a big house, and fill their schedule with respectable commitments. Everyone praises their responsibility. Inside, they feel trapped. Schopenhauer would likely say this is the cost of living by external measures rather than internal truth. If your compass is public perception, you will always be pulled toward the image of virtue rather than your personal sense of meaning. And because perception is fickle, Your life will constantly shift to fit whatever the current standard of good happens to be. The danger is that this way of living leaves no space for honest self-discovery. Your desires become buried under layers of performance until you cannot tell if the things you are pursuing are truly yours or just the version of you that others prefer. The irony is that the world needs more people who know what they genuinely want and are brave enough to pursue it, even when it is not applauded. But if your only goal is to appear good, you will never take that risk. You will follow the safest, most approved path. And in doing so, you may spend your entire life walking away from yourself. In final words, what if being good all the time is quietly costing you the very life you are trying to protect? Schopenhauer once wrote that much of what we call morality is really just the will disguised in polite clothing. We act not always from pure principle, but from hidden motives: fear of rejection, hunger for approval, a desire to be untouchable in the eyes of others. The problem with making goodness your constant goal is that it can turn into a kind of self-erasure. You speak carefully so no one is offended. You take on responsibilities you do not want because you cannot bear to disappoint. You avoid necessary confrontations because you do not want to be seen as unkind. On the surface, it looks like moral strength. Underneath, it is often avoidance, insecurity, and a deep discomfort with being misunderstood. Over time, this way of living shapes not just how others see you, but how you see yourself. You begin to mistake your public image for your identity. You stop noticing your own needs because your moral compass has been outsourced to other people's opinions. And the approval you work so hard to maintain is fragile. It disappears the moment you step out of line. True moral courage is different. It is not about being liked or admired. It is about doing what is right, even when it risks your reputation, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is misunderstood. Sometimes that means kindness. Sometimes it means confrontation. Sometimes it means choosing yourself over the image others want from you. The hidden cost of always trying to be good is that you may spend your entire life perfecting a version of yourself that the world loves, while the person you truly are remains a stranger. Thank you for watching.